For centuries, the world has been told one version of history, that Africans first set foot in the Americas as enslaved people, brought across the Atlantic in chains. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, long before Columbus ever set sail from Spain, African explorers had already crossed the vast ocean, reached the shores of the New World, and left their mark on ancient civilizations? This story takes us far beyond the familiar pages of history books, into a time before 1492, when daring navigators, skilled in the art of the sea, may have embarked on journeys across unknown waters. Their names were not written in European chronicles, but traces of their presence still echo through the land, in art, language, and legend. Some ancient carvings bear unmistakably African features. Early explorers recorded encounters with dark-skinned mariners who came from the east, trading in gold and goods. And even Columbus himself, in his own journals, spoke of people with black skin who had arrived in the Caribbean long before him. As we uncover these stories, we're not rewriting history, we're revealing the parts that were hidden, overlooked, or forgotten. History, after all, is not a single line of truth but a web of human journeys, connections, and discoveries that stretch across time and oceans. What we know about who came first might just change everything we thought we understood about the beginnings of the Americas. Join us as we explore this untold chapter, a story of courage, innovation, and exploration that challenges the boundaries of history as we know it. From the empires of Mali to the shores of ancient Mexico, we'll follow the clues, examine the evidence, and ask the question, could Africans have reached the New World long before Columbus? If you're ready to dive into a side of history that's rarely told, make sure to like this video, share it with others who love discovering hidden truths, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that open your eyes to the past, and to the power of knowing where we truly come from. In the early 20th century, a few bold scholars began to question the accepted boundaries of history. Among them was Leo Wiener, a linguist and historian from Harvard University, whose curiosity led him to uncover strange connections between the languages of West Africa and those of pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas. To many of his peers, such ideas seemed far-fetched, even impossible. But to Wiener, history was not a closed book, it was a living puzzle waiting to be pieced together. Wiener noticed peculiar similarities in words, symbols, and agricultural traditions that spanned two distant continents. He pointed to the cultivation of certain crops like cotton and gourds, both common in Africa and the Americas long before European contact. He observed echoes of African influence in the art and architecture of Mesoamerica, shapes, designs, and motifs that seemed to cross oceans and centuries. While others dismissed these as coincidence, Wiener proposed something revolutionary, that ancient Africans, long before Columbus, had made contact with the peoples of the New World. Decades later, another scholar, Ivan van Sertima, reignited this daring idea. A historian and anthropologist from Guyana, van Sertima brought fresh energy and evidence to the discussion. In 1976, his groundbreaking work, They Came Before Columbus, stirred both excitement and controversy. Through meticulous research, he traced possible connections between the civilizations of West Africa and those of Central and South America. He analyzed artifacts, linguistic patterns, and even botanical evidence that suggested exchange and influence across the Atlantic. Van Sertima was particularly fascinated by the Olmec civilization, often regarded as the mother culture of ancient Mesoamerica. The Olmecs left behind colossal stone heads with broad noses and full lips, features that van Sertima and others believed bore striking resemblance to African physiognomy. To him, these monuments were not mere artistic choices, they were living testimony to a time when African travelers may have reached American shores and shared their culture, knowledge, and art. Beyond art and language, van Sertima explored the movement of ideas. He proposed that African navigators possessed the knowledge and technology to cross vast oceans, guided by the stars, currents, and wind patterns. Ancient African civilizations such as Mali and Egypt were not isolated, they were centers of learning, trade, and exploration. The idea that their people could have ventured westward, seeking new lands and encounters, seemed not only plausible but deeply human. Of course, not everyone agreed. Many historians and archaeologists demanded stronger evidence, arguing that similarities in art or crops could arise independently. Yet even critics acknowledged that van Sertima's work forced the academic world to reconsider the limits of ancient travel and communication. His message was not only about Africans arriving in America, it was about challenging the narrow lens through which history had been written. Together, Wiener and van Sertima opened a door to a forgotten conversation, one about human connection before conquest, about cultural exchange before colonization. Their ideas remind us that the ocean, often seen as a barrier, may have been a bridge linking worlds long before the sails of European ships appeared on the horizon. Whether or not the full truth is ever uncovered, their work invites us to imagine a past richer and more connected than we were ever taught to believe. In the autumn of 1492, when Christopher Columbus and his crew landed in the Caribbean, they believed they had stumbled upon islands at the edge of Asia. The air was heavy with salt and mystery, and the people they encountered carried stories older than any European map could record. Among the many accounts Columbus kept in his journals, one entry stands out, a small but curious detail that has puzzled historians for centuries. According to his writings, Columbus received a set of metal-tipped spears from the local inhabitants. The metal, a reddish alloy, was unfamiliar to the Europeans. When he asked the natives where the material had come from, their answer was both surprising and cryptic. They said the spears were obtained through trade with black men who had arrived from the southeast, sailing in large boats. For Columbus, who believed he was near the coast of India or Africa, the remark might not have seemed extraordinary. But to later generations of historians, this fleeting note suggested something astonishing, the possibility that African sailors had reached the Americas long before Columbus ever set sail from Spain. Over the years, researchers have revisited this moment, examining not only the words of Columbus but also the nature of the metal itself. Some argued that the alloy, called guanin by the natives, closely resembled metals used in West Africa, particularly in regions around the ancient empires of Mali and Ghana. In those lands, skilled metalworkers crafted tools and ornaments with similar compositions, a blend of gold, silver, and copper, carefully balanced in ways that matched the guanin found in the Caribbean. If this connection were true, it would mean that transatlantic trade might have occurred centuries before European contact, linking two continents through routes long forgotten by history. It also hints at the possibility that African navigators, perhaps from the western coast of Africa, had ventured across the Atlantic, guided by ocean currents that flow naturally from the Gulf of Guinea to the shores of the Americas. To some, this theory remains speculation, a story built upon coincidence. But to others, it's a clue, one of many fragments suggesting a wider web of contact between Africa and the New World. The ocean, after all, was not an impenetrable wall. It was a living pathway, moving with winds and currents that ancient mariners may have learned to read like a map. Imagine, centuries before the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, vessels setting out from the coast of Africa, not as part of conquest, but exploration. Their sails catching the trade winds, their hulls filled with goods, metals, and stories meant to be shared across distant lands. These travelers, unknown to history, may have reached the Caribbean islands, leaving behind traces of their journey not in monuments, but in memories and traded objects, like the guanin-tipped spears that found their way into Columbus's hands. The story remains a mystery, neither proven nor disproven, suspended between legend and possibility. Yet, within that small exchange between a European sailor and an islander lies a glimpse of something profound, a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it seems. Long before the maps were redrawn, the sea may have already carried the echoes of those who dared to cross it, their presence whispered through time in the glint of a metal spearhead. Deep in the jungles of southern Mexico, long before the rise of the Maya or the Aztecs, an ancient civilization flourished, the Olmecs. Their world was filled with lush forests, winding rivers, and sacred mountains, a place where gods and men seemed to share the same breath. But what truly captured the imagination of future generations were the monuments they left behind, colossal stone heads, each carved with striking precision from massive basalt boulders, some weighing more than 10 tons. When archaeologists first uncovered these immense sculptures in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they were astonished. The faces were bold and lifelike, their expressions calm yet powerful. The features, broad noses, full lips, and deeply set eyes, seemed unlike the delicate lines often associated with other Mesoamerican art. These faces, carved thousands of years ago, sparked one of the most enduring debates in the study of the ancient Americas: who were these figures meant to represent? To many historians, the Olmec heads were portraits of rulers or warriors, immortalized in stone to preserve their authority for eternity. But to others, including scholars like Ivan van Sertima, they hinted at something more, a possible link between Africa and the Americas long before Columbus. The resemblance between the faces of these monuments and certain African physiognomies seemed too strong to dismiss as coincidence. Could it be, some wondered, that travelers from across the Atlantic had reached these shores and influenced the art and identity of this mysterious culture? Each head carries its own story. Some are adorned with intricate helmets or headdresses, suggesting leadership, ceremony, or even a connection to ball games central to Mesoamerican life. But beyond their symbolism lies an even deeper enigma: the sheer skill required to carve and transport these massive stones without the use of metal tools or beasts of burden. The Olmecs not only created art, they engineered miracles. And if such monumental works could exist in the heart of the jungle, who's to say what other connections their civilization might have forged? For those who see traces of African influence, the Olmec heads stand as silent witnesses to a forgotten chapter of global history. The idea is not of conquest or domination, but of cultural exchange, of explorers from Africa sharing knowledge, craftsmanship, and perhaps even stories that shaped the early development of the Americas. The similarities in artistic style, as well as parallels in spiritual symbolism and architecture, are seen by some as evidence that ancient peoples were far more connected than modern maps suggest. Yet, the mystery remains unresolved. Most archaeologists attribute the Olmec features to indigenous traits, shaped by local aesthetics rather than foreign influence. There is no definitive proof of African contact, no written records, no identifiable artifacts that bridge the two worlds beyond doubt. Still, the power of the Olmec heads lies not just in their physical presence, but in the questions they raise. They remind us that history is often a dialogue between what we know and what we have yet to understand. Standing before one of these massive sculptures, weathered by centuries of rain and sun, one cannot help but feel the weight of the past pressing forward, a silent voice whispering through stone. Whether they depict ancient rulers of Mexico or distant travelers from another shore, the Olmec heads invite us to look beyond boundaries, to imagine a world where oceans connected rather than divided, and where human creativity knew no continent. Long before maps divided the world into continents, people were already connected in ways the oceans could not erase. Across thousands of miles of open sea, two distant lands, Africa and the Americas, seemed to breathe in rhythm. Though separated by the Atlantic, they shared an unexpected bond found not in monuments or artifacts, but in the living things that sustained life, the crops people grew, the symbols they carved, and the rituals that shaped their societies. Among the most intriguing parallels are the plants themselves. Centuries before Columbus, both Africans and the peoples of the Americas cultivated yams, cotton, and gourds, crops that appear to tell a silent story of movement and exchange. In West Africa, yams were more than food, they were part of ceremony and identity, celebrated in harvest festivals that marked the turning of seasons. Across the ocean, similar traditions surrounded the cultivation of comparable tubers, suggesting that such practices might have traveled far beyond their place of origin. Cotton, too, presents an enduring mystery. Archaeological evidence shows that species of cotton were grown in both Africa and the Americas long before European contact. In both regions, the fibers were spun into thread and woven into cloth, forming the basis of trade, art, and social status. While some scientists argue these similarities arose independently, others see them as the faint traces of ancient contact, the exchange of seeds, techniques, and cultural meanings carried across the sea by travelers whose names were never written down. Then there are the gourds, humble plants with deep roots in human history. Used as vessels, musical instruments, and ceremonial objects, gourds held symbolic power on both sides of the Atlantic. In West Africa, they were carved and decorated with patterns representing life and fertility. In the Americas, they appeared in similar roles, used in rituals and adorned with motifs that seem strangely familiar. Could these shared designs be mere coincidence? Or are they echoes of a time when knowledge and creativity flowed between two worlds long before official history began recording their encounters? Beyond agriculture, parallels emerge in spiritual and cultural symbols. Certain African cosmological designs, circles within circles, serpentine motifs, and sacred twins, appear in ancient American carvings and artifacts. To some, this reflects a universal human impulse to understand life and nature in similar ways. To others, it suggests contact, a diffusion of ideas carried across generations and oceans. The Atlantic, often seen as a barrier, was also a bridge. Its currents, steady and predictable, flow westward from Africa to the Americas. Ancient sailors, guided by the stars and wind, could have followed these natural pathways, carrying with them not only food and goods but the seeds of culture itself. Over time, those seeds may have taken root in new soil, adapting to new climates yet preserving traces of their origin, just as a transplanted plant remembers the rhythm of its first rain. No one can say with certainty how these connections formed. The evidence lies scattered, fragile, and open to interpretation. But through the humble yam, the woven thread of cotton, or the hollowed gourd that once carried water and song, a quiet story emerges, one that suggests the human spirit has always reached beyond horizons. Whether through coincidence, shared creativity, or forgotten voyages, the link between Africa and the Americas endures, whispering through the crops that sustained civilizations on both sides of the sea. In the heart of West Africa, during the height of the Mali Empire, a legend began that would echo across centuries, the tale of a ruler whose curiosity reached beyond the known world. His name was Mansa Abubakari II, and unlike most kings of his time, his greatest desire was not conquest or gold, but discovery. He ruled one of the richest kingdoms in history, a land built on trade, knowledge, and faith. But even the vast wealth of Mali could not quiet his wonder about what lay beyond the endless horizon of the Atlantic Ocean. Abubakari's story begins in the early 14th century, when the empire stood as a beacon of learning and prosperity. Timbuktu and Gao flourished as centers of scholarship, where astronomers charted the stars and travelers brought tales from distant lands. Yet, one mystery remained unsolved: where did the great western river, the Atlantic, end? The king, it is said, became obsessed with this question. He gathered his council and declared his intent to uncover what lay beyond the sea that bordered his empire. According to chronicles recorded by Arab historian al-Umari, Abubakari first sent out an expedition of 200 ships filled with sailors, provisions, and gold. Only one ship returned. The surviving captain told of a powerful current that swept the rest of the fleet into the open ocean, never to be seen again. Many rulers would have stopped there, accepting the sea as an unconquerable force. But Abubakari was not like most rulers. Determined to find the truth for himself, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. He would lead a second, far greater expedition, not as a king, but as an explorer. He entrusted the throne to his brother, Mansa Musa, who would later become one of the most celebrated rulers in history, and prepared a new fleet of ships. Some accounts claim there were hundreds, perhaps even thousands, built from the finest timber of the empire. They were equipped with food, water, and goods for trade, and manned by the most skilled sailors and navigators of Mali. Then, in a moment that blurred the line between history and legend, Abubakari II set sail westward, into the vast unknown. No one knows for certain what became of him or his fleet. Some believe they were lost to the currents of the Atlantic, their ships swallowed by storms. Others whisper that they reached distant shores, perhaps in the Caribbean or along the coast of South America, centuries before Columbus ever began his voyage. Oral traditions in parts of West Africa and even among indigenous groups in the Americas speak of foreign visitors who arrived in great boats, dark-skinned men who traded gold and crafts unlike any seen before. Though physical evidence remains elusive, the story of Abubakari II has continued to inspire generations of historians and explorers alike. It challenges the idea that exploration began with Europe, reminding the world that Africa, too, had its visionaries, leaders who looked not to the past, but to the horizon. The legend of Mansa Abubakari II stands as a testament to human curiosity and courage. Whether his ships ever touched the sands of a new world or vanished beneath the waves, his spirit endures as part of the shared heritage of exploration, a story of a ruler who dared to believe that beyond the sea lay something more than mystery, perhaps even another world waiting to be found. In the pursuit of understanding the past, evidence is both a beacon and a boundary. For centuries, stories of African voyagers reaching the Americas before Columbus have stirred fascination and debate. The idea captures the imagination, mighty ships crossing the Atlantic, explorers sharing culture and knowledge long before European sails appeared on the horizon. Yet, when these stories meet the scrutiny of modern science, the path forward becomes less clear, shrouded in uncertainty and unanswered questions. Archaeologists, historians, and geneticists have long searched for traces of these early encounters. If African travelers had indeed reached the Americas, their presence would have left footprints, in the soil, in bones, in artifacts, or perhaps in the genetic memory of those who came after. But despite years of investigation, conclusive evidence remains elusive. What has been found, scattered carvings, unusual sculptures, and curious metal alloys, has often been difficult to date or place within a firm historical context. Some artifacts, once hailed as proof of early transatlantic contact, have later been reinterpreted or dismissed after closer examination. Radiocarbon dating has placed several objects within timelines that don't align with claims of pre-Columbian exchange. Others, though intriguing in form, were discovered without proper documentation of where or how they were found, leaving their stories incomplete. In archaeology, context is everything. Without it, even the most striking discovery can lose its meaning. Genetic studies, too, have offered little to confirm the theory. Modern analyses of ancient remains from across the Americas show complex lineages connected to Asia and the Pacific, but little direct evidence of African ancestry before the transatlantic slave trade. While such findings don't entirely rule out the possibility of earlier contact, they do suggest that if it occurred, it left only faint or temporary traces, not the lasting imprint that major migration or cultural integration would produce. Still, the absence of proof does not silence the allure of the unknown. The ocean itself hides more than it reveals, and much of history remains buried beneath waves and centuries. For every question answered, a dozen more rise from the depths. Could wooden ships or early metal artifacts have survived saltwater and time? Could entire stories have vanished beneath shifting sands or eroding coastlines? Some researchers argue that science is still catching up with legend. They suggest that future discoveries, underwater excavations, new dating methods, or refined DNA analysis, may one day offer clearer insight. Others maintain that the lack of concrete evidence should not be seen as a denial of possibility, but as an invitation to keep searching. After all, history is filled with truths once dismissed as myth until evidence emerged to confirm them. Yet, what makes this debate enduring is not just the question of whether Africans reached the Americas first, but what the search itself represents: humanity's relentless drive to know where we come from. Every shard, every carving, every rumor of contact tells us something about our shared desire to connect the dots across time and distance. For now, the story remains suspended between science and imagination. The evidence is incomplete, the conclusions uncertain. But in that uncertainty lies something deeply human, the recognition that the past is still speaking, even if its voice is faint, carried on the same winds that once swept across the Atlantic, whispering to all who listen that history, like the ocean, still holds secrets waiting to be found. History is often told by those who had the power to write it, leaving behind voices that were silenced or forgotten. For generations, the story of human exploration and discovery has centered on a single narrative, one that begins in Europe and unfolds outward. But the theory of African contact with the Americas before Columbus, whether ultimately proven or not, invites us to step beyond those narrow borders and imagine a past that is far more complex, far more interconnected, than the one we have been taught. It challenges the idea that history moves in one direction, or that discovery belongs to any one people. Instead, it suggests a world where oceans were bridges, not barriers, where courage, curiosity, and innovation flowed across the tides long before official chronicles began. It reminds us that exploration did not begin with European sails on the horizon, but with countless voyages taken by men and women from every corner of the world, driven by the same spirit of wonder that defines humanity itself. Perhaps the greatest lesson in this story lies not in the evidence we can touch, but in the questions we are willing to ask. To question the past is to reclaim it, to give space to those histories that were overshadowed, to honor civilizations whose achievements were diminished or erased. It is an act of recognition, not rebellion. In exploring possibilities once dismissed, we do not rewrite history, we expand it. We make room for forgotten voices, for hidden connections, and for the understanding that human history is not a single thread, but a tapestry woven from many hands. As we look back across centuries and seas, the story of possible African explorers in the Americas stands as both mystery and message, a reminder that there is still so much we do not know, and that truth often lies in the spaces between what has been recorded and what has been remembered. The world has always been more connected than the maps suggest, its stories more intertwined than its borders allow. If these ideas stir something within you, a spark of curiosity, a desire to see the past in a new light, then you are part of the same journey. Because the search for truth, no matter how uncertain, is what keeps history alive. Thank you for watching. If you want to continue exploring stories that challenge what we think we know about the past, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we uncover more hidden chapters of our shared human story.